I remember the exact second my mother's eyes stopped believing in me, and I was the one who put the doubt there. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of gray afternoon that makes the Hudson Valley look like a watercolor left out in rain. I was 29, drunk on cheap red wine, and my own bitterness. Standing in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, the one with the cracked linoleum and the fridge that hummed like it was trying to apologize for everything. She'd asked me so quietly, I almost didn't hear it over the radiator clanking, "Are you happy, Peter?" Not proud, not successful, just happy. And I laughed. I laughed like a man who'd forgotten the sound of his own voice and wanted to punish the world for reminding him. I told her happiness was for people who didn't have to fight for every inch of air. I told her I was tired of pretending the world wanted me in it. I told her a lot of things I'd rehearsed in the mirror, things that sounded brave when I was alone and cruel when they landed on her face. She didn't cry. She just looked at me, really looked, the way she used to when I was small, and scraped my knee, and she could fix it with a kiss and a Band-Aid. Only this time there was no kiss, no Band-Aid, just this slow, terrible understanding that her son had become someone she didn't know how to reach. I saw it happen, the lights dimming behind her eyes, and I kept talking anyway because stopping would have meant admitting I was wrong, and I wasn't ready to be wrong. Not then, not when I still believed anger was the only honest thing I had left. I'd come home for the weekend because my agent had stopped returning calls, because the play I'd poured 3 years into had closed after 4 performances, because the reviews called me memorable in a role that asked too much of his physicality, which is critic speak for we liked the gimmick, not the man. I was drowning, and instead of reaching for the hand my mother kept offering, I slapped it away. Wanted her to fight me, to yell, to prove she still saw the boy who used to build forts out of couch cushions and swear he'd be an astronaut. But she didn't fight. She just stood there in her faded cardigan, the one with the hole in the elbow she refused to mend because it was your father's, and she said, "I think you should go." Not angry, not disappointed, just done. Like I'd used up whatever reserve of hope she'd been saving for me. I grabbed my coat, the one with the torn pocket where I kept the rejection letters I couldn't bring myself to throw away, and I walked out. The screen door slammed behind me like a judge's gavel. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I'd seen her face one more time, I might have fallen to my knees right there on the porch and begged her to tell me I was still her little boy. But I didn't. I got in my car, a rusting Civic with a busted muffler that sounded like it was coughing up its life, and I drove away. The last thing I heard was the wind chimes on the porch, the ones she'd hung. The summer I was 10, tinkling like they were trying to call me back. I didn't stop until I was 3 states away, until the wine wore off. And the silence in the car was louder than any argument I'd ever had. That was the moment. Not the reviews, not the empty theater seats, not the way casting directors looked past me like I was a prop they hadn't decided to use. It was my mother's eyes going quiet. That was the fracture. Everything before was just pressure building. Everything after was the slow, painful rebuilding of a man who finally understood what he'd broken. I didn't call her for 6 months. I told myself I was giving her space. I told myself she needed time to cool off. I told myself a lot of lies that tasted like ash. The truth was I was ashamed. Ashamed of the way I'd weaponized my pain. Ashamed of how good it felt to hurt someone who'd never hurt me. I moved into a studio apartment in Hell's Kitchen that smelled like old curry and regret. Took a job bartending at a theater district pub where the actors came to drown their callbacks. I smiled when they complained about typecasting, nodded when they swore the business was rigged, poured them another round, and hated myself for every drop. At night, I'd sit on the fire escape with a notebook trying to write something. That didn't sound like the whine of a man who'd mistaken bitterness for depth. The pages stayed blank, not for lack of trying, for lack of truth. I'd spent so long performing my anger that I didn't know how to write from anywhere else. There's a line in Hamlet that used to make me roll my eyes when I was younger. The readiness is all. I thought it was Shakespeare being cryptic, dodging the real question of how to live when the world keeps kicking you in the teeth. But after that night with my mother, I started to understand. Readiness isn't about having answers. It's about being willing to stand in the wreckage and admit it's yours. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I was still cataloging grievances like a miser counting coins, still convinced The universe owed me something for the crime of being born different. I'd built an entire identity around defiance. And defiance is a hell of a drug. It keeps you warm until it burns the house down. I kept waiting for the pain to fade, for the memory of her face to blur around the edges like an old photograph. It didn't. It sharpened. Every time I poured a drink for someone else's sorrow, I saw her standing in that kitchen, cardigan slipping off one shoulder, eyes asking a question I'd refuse to answer. I started having dreams where I'd go back to the house, but the porch would be empty. The wind chimes gone, and I'd wake up gasping like I'd been under war for years. I lost weight. My hands shook when I tried to write. The bartender, who'd once charmed tips out of tourists, couldn't muster a smile for love or money. My boss, a former chorus girl named Delilah, who'd seen every kind of broken in her 50 years, finally pulled me aside after I dropped a tray of glasses and just stood there staring at the shards like they were a map to somewhere better. Peter, she said, lighting a cigarette with fingers that had once held maracas on. A cruise ship stage. Whatever you're carrying, it's heavier than those glasses. Put it down before it cuts you. I wanted to laugh, to tell her she didn't understand that some weights you don't get to put down, but I was so tired. Tired of pretending I was fine, tired of the performance. So I told her, not all of it, just enough, about my mother, about the way I'd left, about the silence that had followed me like a second shadow. Delilah listened without interrupting, which was its own kind of miracle. When I finished, she stubbed out her cigarette and said, you know what the difference is between a tragedy and a story? In a tragedy, the hero dies at the end. In a story, he changes. You still get to choose which one this is. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the fire escape until the sky turned the color of weak coffee, thinking about choices, about the moment I'd walked out instead of staying to fight for the relationship. That mattered more than any role I'd ever auditioned for. I thought about Camus, who said the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. I'd always liked the sound of that, but I'd never understood it. Struggle for what? Heights of what? Fame? Validation? I'd been climbing the wrong mountain, and the fall had nearly killed me. The next morning I called my mother. It rang 4 times, and each one felt like a year. When she answered, her voice was cautious, like she was bracing for another fight. I didn't give her the chance. I said, Mom, it's me. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. And then I cried, not the dignified single tear of movies, but the ugly, snot-nosed sobbing of a man who'd finally run out of defenses. She didn't speak for a long time, and I thought maybe she'd hung up. Then I heard her crying too, and it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard because it meant she was still there, still willing to feel something for me. We didn't fix everything in that call. We didn't even try. We just cried together until there was nothing left but the sound of 2 people breathing the same air for the first time in months. I drove home the next weekend. The house looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was just seeing it with new eyes. She met me at the door, and for a moment, we just stood there, 2 actors who'd forgotten their lines. Then she hugged me so hard I felt my ribs creak. And I hugged her. Act like I was trying to make up for every second I'd spend away. We didn't talk about that night in the kitchen. We didn't need to. Some apologies live in the spaces between words, in the way you pour someone's coffee, exact how they like it, in the way you sit on the porch swing and let the silence be enough. I stayed for a month. I fixed the screen door that had been broken since I was 12. I painted the kitchen, the soft yellow she'd always wanted but never asked for. I cooked her favorite meals badly, but with enthusiasm, and we laughed at how terrible my risotto was. I told her about the play that had closed, about the reviews, about the way I'd let them define me. She listened the way she always had, with her whole body, like every word was a gift she was afraid to drop. When I finished, she said, you know, your father used to say talent is just pain that hasn't found its purpose yet. I asked her what he meant. She smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her in years, and said, he meant that what breaks you can also build you if you let it. I thought about that a lot in the months that followed. I went back to the city, but I wasn't the same man who'd left. I started writing again, not the bitter monologues I'd been churning out, but something raw. A one-man show about a son who loses his mother's faith and spends years trying to earn it back. I called it The Weight of Small Things. The first draft was terrible. The second was better. By the 5th, I had something that made the actors I read it to cry in the middle of a sentence. I didn't audition for anything that year. I didn't need to. The story was enough. It was mine, and it was true. And for the first time in my life, that felt like power. There's a moment in The Great Gatsby where Nick Carraway says, "So we beat on boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past." I used to think that was the saddest thing I'd ever read. No, I think it's the most honest. We are always being pulled back to the moments that shaped us, the ones we got wrong, the ones we wish we could redo. But the current isn't just dragging us. It's teaching us how to swim. My mother's eyes that night, the way they went quiet there with me every time I step on stage, every time I write a line that makes someone in the audience catch their breath, they remind me that the cost of connection is vulnerability, and the cost of vulnerability is sometimes pain. But the alternative is silence, and I've lived in silence. I know what it costs. I performed The Weight of Small Things off-Broadway in a 90-seat theater that smelled like old velvet and possibility. The night of the first preview, I was terrified, not of forgetting lines or missing cues, of facing an audience with the truth I'd spent years hiding from. My mother sat in the front row, wearing the cardigan with the hole in the elbow, the one she still hadn't mended. When I walked on stage and saw her there, something in me settled. The lights came up, and I started to speak not as a character, but as myself. I told them about the kitchen, about the wine, about the way I'd laughed when she asked if I was happy. I told them about the drive away, about the wind chimes, about the 6 months of silence that felt like 6 years. And when I got to the part where I called her and we cried together, I looked right at her and said the line I'd written 100 times. Never dared to believe. I thought I was teaching the world a lesson. Turns out I was just teaching myself how to be alone. The audience was silent for a long time after I finished. Then someone in the back started clapping, and it spread like wildfire. My mother didn't clap. She just sat there with tears running down her face, smiling like she'd known all along I'd find my way back. After the show, people came up to me, strangers who'd lost parents, children who said things they couldn't take back, men who'd mistaken anger for strength. They didn't want autographs. They wanted to tell me their versions of the story, to say thank you for giving theirs a voice. I listened to every one. I owed them that. The show ran for 6 months. It got picked up by a bigger theater than another. I won an award I didn't expect and didn't know how to accept without crying. None of it mattered as much as the night my mother came to see it for the 10th time and brought a friend who'd lost her own son to addiction. After the curtain call, the woman took my hand and said, "Your mother told me you used to build forts out of couch cushions. She said you were going to be an astronaut." I laughed, embarrassed, but she wasn't finished. She was right, she said. "You just took the long way around." I think about that a lot now. About the long way around. About how the moments we're most ashamed of are often the ones that save us, if we let them. I still have bad days. Days when the old bitterness creeps in. When I hear a review that stings, or see a role go to someone taller, blonder, less complicated, but I don't let it define me anymore. I have a ritual now. When the darkness starts to close in, I go to the water. There's a spot on the Hudson where the current is strong and the gulls scream like they're arguing with God. I stand there and I think about my mother's eyes, about the way they went quiet and then slowly came back to life. I think about the weight of small things, the screen door I fixed, the yellow paint, the terrible risotto. I think about how love isn't a grand gesture, but 1,000 tiny ones stacked, like bricks, until they build something that can withstand anything. I called her last night just to check in. She's 80 now, slower than she used to be. But her voice is still the safest place I know. I told her about a new project I'm writing, something about forgiveness and second chances. She listened the way she always does. Then said, "You know, Peter, I never stopped believing in you. I just needed you to start believing in yourself." I didn't cry this time. I smiled so hard my face hurt. 'Cause she's right. The moment I thought broke us was the moment that rebuilt me. Not into someone perfect, God, no, but into someone whole. Someone who knows the difference between surviving and living. Someone who understands that the greatest role I'll ever play isn't on a stage or a screen. It's the quiet daily performance of showing up for the people who never stop showing up for me. If you're listening to this and you've got a moment like mine, a kitchen, a slammed door, a silence that echoes, "Don't wait 6 months. Don't wait 6 minutes. Call. Write. Drive. Whatever it takes." Say the thing you're afraid will break you, because it won't. It'll bend you into the shape you were always meant to be. Pain isn't the enemy. Avoidance is. Regret is. The story isn't over when you fall, it's over when you decide the fall was the whole point. Mine wasn't. It was just the beginning. I used to think strength was never needing anyone. Now I know it's letting them see you need them, trusting they'll stay anyway. My mother stayed through the anger, through the silence, through the long way around. She stayed, and in staying, she taught me how to stay for myself, for the work, for the messy, beautiful business of being human. The wind chimes are still on the porch. I hung new. Ones after the old set finally gave out, but they sound the same. They sound like coming home. They sound like forgiveness. They sound like the strongest version of myself, the one forged in the fire of a moment. I'll never stop caring because it's the moment that taught me how to carry everything else. So here I am, Peter, not the actor, not the award winner, not the punchline or the inspiration porn. Just Peter, a man who broke his mother's heart and spent years learning how to mend it one small, honest thing at a time. If that's not a life worth living, I don't know what is. The current's still there, pulling us back to the moments we got wrong. We get to decide what we do with the pull. We get to beat on. We get to build something that lasts. I know, because I'm living proof. And if a bitter, broken bartender from Hell's Kitchen can find his way back to the light, so can you. The forts are still there, waiting under the couch cushions. The stars are still there, waiting beyond the atmosphere. All you have to do is start building. All you have to do is reach.